Hello everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day. Today we're diving into a dramatic new chapter as the CEO gives up his luxurious life to rebuild his future from scratch in Tieu Lac's hometown, selling strawberries and working side by side with the villagers. But just when hope begins to return, dangerous enemies from Tieu Lac's past suddenly reappear, while the CEO's powerful mother continues watching their every move from the shadows. Can the CEO protect Tieu Lac, defend his new dream, and overcome the threats closing in from every direction? Stay with us until the very end to find out. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, betrayal, and unforgettable twists, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next episode. The morning after his daughter's first birthday, the CEO woke up before sunrise. The little countryside house was still quiet. Tieu Lac and their daughter were sleeping peacefully. Her mother was already outside, sweeping the front yard as she had done every morning for years. The CEO quietly stepped outside. The cool breeze brushed across the endless rice fields. For a long moment, he simply stood there, watching the sun slowly rise over the village. Not long ago, his mornings had begun with stock reports, shareholder meetings, and urgent business calls. Now, his day began with birdsong and the scent of wet soil. Strangely, he didn't miss the old life as much as he thought he would. He remembered the promise he had made beside his father's hospital bed. "I'll come back with my own strength." Those words weren't just a promise anymore. They had become his purpose. If he truly wanted to rebuild everything, he had to start here, from nothing. After breakfast, the CEO surprised everyone. "I'm going to work." Tieu Lac looked at him curiously. "You already have something in mind?" He nodded. "Not a company, not an office, but an opportunity." Her mother smiled gently. "In this village, the only thing we have plenty of is farmland." The CEO laughed. "Then maybe farmland is exactly where my future begins." Instead of wearing a suit, he put on an old straw hat borrowed from a neighbor. Simple clothes, rubber boots, a notebook tucked into his pocket. Seeing him dressed like that, Tieu Lac couldn't help laughing. "You don't look like a CEO anymore," he grinned. "Good. That's exactly what I want." For the next several days, the villagers became used to seeing him walking through every corner of the countryside. But he wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was observing, recording, learning. Whenever he entered a farm, he asked endless questions. How many kilograms do you harvest each season? What price do traders usually pay? Which months produce the highest quality? How much is lost during transportation? At first, many farmers looked confused. Why would someone ask so many strange questions? One elderly farmer finally asked, "What exactly are you trying to do?" The CEO smiled. "I'm trying to understand the value everyone else overlooks." The old man laughed. "We've been growing fruit our whole lives. What value could we possibly be missing?" The CEO looked across the strawberry fields stretching into the distance. "The fruit isn't the problem. It's the way it's being sold." The old farmer frowned. "What do you mean?" The CEO knelt beside several baskets of freshly picked strawberries. "They're beautiful. They're sweet. But by the time middlemen buy them, the price has already fallen. And by the time they reach the city, the selling price becomes 3 or 4 times higher." The surrounding farmers slowly fell silent. No one had ever explained it that way before. The CEO continued filling page after page inside his notebook. Harvest volume, transportation costs, seasonal demand, customer preferences, everything. Tieu Lac quietly watched him. She had never seen him work like this before. Back in the city, he managed billion-dollar investments. Now, he carefully counted baskets of strawberries under the hot sun. Yet, his determination hadn't changed at all. One afternoon, Tieu Lac handed him a bottle of water. "You've been walking all day. Aren't you tired?" He smiled. "I've never felt more alive." She looked at his notebook. So many numbers. "What are you planning?" The CEO looked toward the busy village market. "I'm looking for a beginning." The following morning, he surprised Tieu Lac again. "I'm going to the market with you." She laughed. "You? I've never seen you sell anything." He smiled confidently. "Neither have I." Before sunrise, the two of them loaded baskets of fresh strawberries onto an old bicycle cart. The road to the market wasn't smooth. Every bump made several berries roll around inside the baskets. When they finally arrived, the market was already crowded. Voices echoed everywhere. Fresh vegetables, fish, flowers, fruit. The air buzzed with energy. Tieu Lac quickly arranged the strawberries on a small wooden table. The CEO quietly observed every neighboring stall. Customer flow, popular prices, buying habits. Everything became another lesson. An elderly vendor laughed. "Young man, are you selling strawberries or studying the market?" The CEO smiled politely. "Maybe both." Business wasn't easy. Several hours passed. Only a few baskets had been sold. Many customers preferred buying from familiar sellers. Others bargained over every small amount. The CEO never became impatient. Instead, he listened carefully. Every complaint became information. Every suggestion became an idea. By noon, the weather suddenly became scorching hot. The strawberries began losing freshness. Tieu Lac looked worried. "If we don't sell them soon, we'll lose money." The CEO thought quietly for several seconds, then suddenly stood up. Instead of waiting behind the table, he picked up one basket himself. He walked through the crowded market, smiling warmly, offering free samples, introducing the strawberries directly to customers. They were picked only this morning. No chemicals. Naturally sweet. Try one. At first, people simply looked at him curiously. Then, someone tasted one. Another customer stopped. Then another, within less than 1 hour. Every basket had sold out. Tieu Lac stared at the empty table in disbelief. "You actually did it." The CEO laughed. "We didn't just sell strawberries. We sold trust." On the journey home, both of them couldn't stop smiling. The money they earned wasn't much, not compared with the fortune he once controlled. But somehow, it felt far more meaningful. That evening, the CEO carefully updated his notebook again. Today's sales, customer reactions, popular price points, ideas for packaging, ideas for branding, ideas for direct delivery to nearby cities. A small dream was quietly taking shape. However, not everyone was happy. Far away, inside the city, the CEO's mother slowly read another investigation report. Every page described her son's daily activities, working in the fields, selling strawberries, helping farmers, collecting agricultural data. She slowly removed her glasses. "So, you've chosen to become a farmer?" The investigator standing before her hesitated. Should we continue watching him? A cold smile slowly appeared on her face. No. It's time to remind him. No matter where he runs, he'll never escape. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Tieu Lac's village, several motorcycles slowly stopped beneath a large tree. 3 rough-looking men climbed off. One of them stared toward the distant market road. A scar stretched across his face. His expression darkened as he unfolded an old photograph. Inside the picture was Tieu Lac, standing beside the CEO. The scar-faced man slowly smiled. "So, we finally found you." The motorcycles roared back to life, heading straight toward the peaceful village where the CEO believed his new beginning had finally begun. The next morning, The village market became lively before sunrise. Vendors arranged vegetables in neat rows. Fresh fruit filled woven baskets. Motorbikes came and went along the narrow road. For everyone else, it was just another ordinary day. For the CEO, it was another chance to move one step closer to the promise he had made to his father. This time, he didn't bring only strawberries. He carried his notebook once again. Over the past week, every conversation with farmers had become valuable information. He now knew which crops produced the highest profits, which farms struggled with transportation, which families were forced to sell cheaply because they had nowhere to store their harvest. The more he learned, the clearer the picture became. The problem had never been the quality of the village's produce. The real problem was that no one had ever connected the farmers directly to larger markets. Walking beside Tieu Lac, he spoke excitedly. "If we organize everyone together, we can negotiate better prices." She smiled. "You've been thinking about this all night, haven't you?" He laughed. "I don't think I slept much. I keep seeing possibilities." She looked at him quietly. The sparkle had returned to his eyes. It wasn't the confidence of the wealthy CEO she had first met. It was something deeper. A man rebuilding his future, one honest step at a time. That afternoon, several farmers gathered beneath a large banyan tree after hearing that the CEO wanted to speak. Some came out of curiosity, others simply wanted to listen. The CEO stood before them with nothing more than his notebook. No expensive presentation, no projector, no luxurious meeting room, only simple words. "I've spent the last several days learning from all of you. You work harder than anyone, but you're earning less than you deserve." The villagers exchanged glances. Many silently nodded. He continued, "What if we sold together instead of separately? What if we packed our fruit under one name? What if customers in the city knew exactly where these strawberries came from?" An elderly farmer frowned. "That sounds nice. But we've heard promises before." Nothing ever changed. The CEO nodded respectfully. "I understand. So don't trust my words. Judge me by what I do." Silence filled the gathering. No one answered immediately, but no one walked away either. That alone gave him hope. Over the next several days, the CEO became busier than ever. During the mornings, he worked alongside the farmers. In the afternoons, he helped Tieu Lac sell fruit. At night, he organized pages of data by candlelight after everyone else had gone to sleep. Sometimes, Tieu Lac woke up in the middle of the night. She would find him still writing quietly, calculating transportation costs, sketching simple package designs, planning future deliveries. She gently placed a cup of warm tea beside him. "You should rest," he smiled without looking up. "I will. Just one more page." She laughed softly. "You've been saying that for 3 hours." Even so, she never asked him to stop. Because she knew this dream wasn't about becoming rich again. It was about proving to himself that he could build something with his own hands. Meanwhile, far beyond the peaceful rice fields, 3 motorcycles entered the village unnoticed. The scar-faced man removed his helmet. He slowly looked around. Everything felt familiar. Years ago, he had been one of the local troublemakers who often collected illegal gambling debts and intimidated small vendors. After Tieu Lac had left for the city, he disappeared. Now, he was back. One of the younger men beside him whispered, "Boss, is she really here?" The scar-faced man smiled coldly. "I've waited a long time." "She won't escape this time." The motorcycles quietly disappeared into a nearby abandoned warehouse. No one in the village noticed. That evening, the CEO and Tieu Lac walked home together, carrying several empty baskets. Business had been better than expected. For the first time, several restaurants from a neighboring town had placed advance orders for strawberries. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Tieu Lac smiled happily. "Look, we almost sold out again." The CEO laughed. "Next season, we'll have to grow even more." She teased him. "You already sound like a real farmer." He grinned. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Their laughter echoed along the quiet country road. Neither of them noticed that someone was watching from behind a line of bamboo trees. The scar-faced man silently lowered his binoculars. So, the rich man really stayed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another photograph. This one had been taken years earlier. It showed Tieu Lac working at a small roadside fruit stand before she had ever met the CEO. He folded it carefully, then spoke in a low voice. "Let's welcome our old friend." The next morning, Tieu Lac arrived at the market earlier than usual. She had barely finished arranging the strawberries when three unfamiliar men approached her stall. One of them picked up a basket without asking. He squeezed several strawberries until the juice dripped onto the table. "What terrible fruit," he sneered. The surrounding vendors immediately fell silent. Everyone sensed trouble. Tieu Lac remained calm. "If you don't want to buy them, please don't damage them." The scar-faced man slowly stepped forward. He smiled as though greeting an old acquaintance. "Don't you remember me?" Tieu Lac looked carefully at his face. Within seconds, the color drained from hers. It can't be you," he laughed loudly. "So you still remember. I was afraid city life had erased your memory." Before Tieu Lac could answer, the CEO appeared carrying another basket of strawberries. He immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. He quietly placed the basket on the ground, then walked toward Tieu Lac. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. The scar-faced man looked him up and down. "So, you're the famous husband, the CEO who threw away everything." The surrounding market suddenly became silent. People stopped buying, stopped talking. Everyone watched. The scar-faced man smiled mockingly. "I heard you used to run a giant company. And now, you're selling strawberries." Several of his men burst into laughter. The CEO didn't react. Instead, he calmly stepped beside Tieu Lac. Without saying a word, he gently held her trembling hand. Then he looked directly into the scar-faced man's eyes. "I'm selling an honest living. There is nothing to be ashamed of." For a brief moment, even the scar-faced man seemed surprised. He had expected anger, fear, humiliation. Instead, he saw quiet confidence. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. "This won't be the last time we meet," he said coldly. He turned around and walked away with his men. But before leaving, he deliberately knocked over one basket of strawberries. Bright red fruit scattered across the dusty ground. The motorcycles roared to life and disappeared, leaving behind only silence. The CEO slowly crouched down. He began picking up the strawberries one by one, without a single complaint. Tieu Lac knelt beside him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He gently shook his head. "This isn't your fault." As they gathered the remaining fruit together, the CEO looked toward the road where the motorcycles had vanished. Deep inside, he understood something important. Building a new future would never be as simple as selling strawberries. His mother's invisible pressure still lingered in the background. Now, the ghosts from Tieu Lac's past had returned as well. The peaceful village that had welcomed them with open arms was slowly becoming another battlefield. And this time, the CEO knew he could no longer fight only with business plans. He would have to protect not only his dream, but also the family that had become the reason he refused to give up. After giving up his luxurious life, the CEO begins rebuilding his future from the ground up in Tieu Lac's peaceful hometown. Instead of running boardroom meetings, he spends his days collecting data on local crops, studying market prices, and helping farmers understand the true value of their produce. Together with Tieu Lac, he sells fresh strawberries at the village market, taking the first meaningful steps toward creating a new agricultural business. Although life is simple, hope slowly returns as villagers begin trusting his ideas. However, danger is never far away. While the CEO's powerful mother secretly monitors his every move from the city, a notorious gang from Tieu Lac's past suddenly reappears, threatening the family they fought so hard to protect. As enemies close in from every direction, can the CEO defend his loved ones and keep his new dream alive before everything is taken away once again?